Hello horror hounds and welcome back to my A to Z of horror. We're at W, which stands for wrongfully imprisoned, because this film has spent far too long in movie jail. It's the much maligned but underrated 2010 remake, The Wolfman. As always, please check out Jambo Shango and Randy Moll's excellent YouTube channel. I will link, as always, to their particular A to Z entry. Their W is a review of Wolf Cop, so we're both getting hairy with our W's, but I've chosen The Wolfman, a film which, let's be honest, had very publicly acknowledged production troubles. In early 2007, director Mark Romanek was attached to the project, and I'm going to read you a quote from him that I stripped from Wikipedia that I think will pretty much sum up the situation. He said, "When there's a certain amount of money involved, these things make studios and producers a little nervous. They don't necessarily understand it, or they feel that the balance will swing too far to something esoteric, and we could never come to an agreement on the right balance for that type of thing. Ultimately, it made more sense for them to find a director that was going to fulfill their idea of the film they wanted, and we just sort of parted ways." So in early 2008, Joe Johnston steps into the breach and onto the helm of a major studio film that was only 3 weeks away from starting principal photography. Joining the film so late in the day placed real limitations on his ability to film without using CG effects. After shooting, the extensive post-production process met with delays because Universal was essentially flip-flopping around the size of the budget, the musical score, FX sequences, what did they want, what didn't they want. The problems faced by The Wolfman are those of modern day cinema. We see it writ large now, the best part of a decade later. Budgets and marketing campaigns are so huge nowadays that every film, it seems, has to be boom or bust. Who wants a multi-million-dollar art house movie that's actually about something? Everyone wants to get over that $1 billion box office line. So what we're left with is a very schizophrenic feeling movie. It's evident, especially in the superior extended cut, that The Wolfman was at one time intended to be a darkly poetic, moody, dramatic piece that paid respectful homage to the original. A film of restrained performances with a broiling sea of emotions churning underneath the surface, as perfectly befits the late 19th century period setting. At some point, someone with a spreadsheet clearly got very nervous and decided that a film called The Wolfman needed some over-the-top transformation scenes, liberal buckets of gore, and limbs tossed liberally around like confetti at a wedding. Whilst I'll always be intrigued to know what the original iteration in its purest form would have looked like, I'm strangely okay with a movie that has a split personality. It fits the subject matter too beautifully. Even if we weren't primed with knowledge of a film being pulled in a few different creative directions before it was released, it would still have been evident that The Wolfman had been under a fairly brutal hatchet instead of a scalpel once it reached the editing suite. Perhaps it's Johnson's lack of experience in the horror realm, or his abrupt entry onto the project which failed to create a movie that lived up to its possibilities. We'll never know what original director Mark Romanek had planned for the movie, but I think we can glean some of the ideas from the movie that is presented to us. With such little time, Johnson only had rushed CGI and a clutch of jump scares that never really hit the mark to try and paper over the joins between two very different movies that Universal were attempting to sew into a unified whole. The biggest victim, I feel, is Rick Baker. Rick Baker, monster maker, in the same pantheon of lauded special effects wizards, along with Stan Winston, Tom Savini, Rob Bottin, and the granddaddy of them all, Jack Pierce. And he chose to honour Jack Pierce's design for The Wolfman. He got into movie making because of Jack Pierce's makeup work on these Universal movies. How terribly sad that he essentially quit the business after seeing his practical creations for this movie overlaid with CG effects. And it's true to say that it's the computer generated effects that have aged the worst out of any element in this movie. It's like eating a sumptuous Black Forest gatto to find that someone's put popping candy inside it. But Baker's designs are still incredibly strong. How can a fully transformed Anthony Hopkins still look like Anthony Hopkins? There's a level of skill and nuance at play here that is truly impressive. Do we really need to see CG fingers bending and breaking? I'm sure someone as skilled as Benicio Del Toro can sell the pain and physicality of a transformation. Likewise, Hopkins, playing a character completely comfortable with the beastly aspect, could have given us a different transformation from a man accepting and embracing his nature rather than fighting it. Rick Baker and makeup effects supervisor Dan Elsey won the Oscar for Best Makeup at the 83rd Academy Awards for their work, and quite rightly so. Whilst generally I accept that a werewolf movie will perhaps live and die by its transformation scenes, and I blame American Werewolf in London for that, for doing it so perfectly. We expect that level of perfection every single time. This Wolfman kind of isn't about a man who turns into a wolf. It's about fathers and sons. From the get-go, it's painfully obvious that Lawrence and his father, John Talbot, have a love-hate relationship, with a little more hate than love. And as the story unfolds, it becomes evident that this family has some pretty dark secrets: suicide, stays in insane asylums, repressed memories, abuse, childhood trauma. Del Toro makes Lawrence Talbot a sad, worried, insular, fatefully doomed from the first frame character, very much at odds with the jolly, hulking Talbot that Lon Chaney Jr. gave us in the 40s. Chaney was cursed, and in a strange way, Del Toro's Talbot has always had a demon inside him. If not for the bite of a wolf, it would have broken to the surface eventually in some other form, and perhaps just as catastrophically. Anthony Hopkins reins in the large side of ham he served us with Van Helsing in Bram Stoker's Dracula. So John Talbot is Lawrence with a few more decades under the hood, more embracing of the darker impulses of his personality and more forgiving of his own sins. Selfish. The dynamic between father and son here is much, much more interesting than between Chaney Jr. and Claude Rains in the original. A hereditary curse rather than a stroke of fate puts a lot of marrow into the bones, plenty to chew on. And when Del Toro and Hopkins are in a room together, needling one another with polite conversation and barely concealed enmity, those underplayed and beautifully shot scenes crackle. I've read far too many reviews that say that Del Toro's performance is too distant and withdrawn for us ever to empathise with him. I'd say turn off your phone, stop tweeting, draw the curtains, close the doors, and pay attention. Just because characters don't swan around declaiming everything that's on their minds, it doesn't mean that nothing's going on. I suspect one of the elements from the original vision, which was jettisoned in favour of some action sequences, is the dark and doomed romance that's clearly supposed to still be at the centre of this. Emily Blunt as Gwen, Lawrence's brother's fiancée and love interest, is underutilised. One has to wonder how much of her character development was sacrificed to make way for an extended rampage through a computer-generated London. But as with Del Toro, and as befits a lady of that time, much of the maelstrom of her emotions is internalised. I like the fact that Lawrence breaks down some of the conventions of the time he's in after he's tainted by the beast, and in turn Gwen's sparking interest in Lawrence is set aflame once he's started on the path towards animalism. The lady's like a bad boy after all. The close scene between them where she's attending to his cut lip and he becomes mesmerized by her throat works perfectly well to show the cracks appearing in the polite veneer of their relationship, threatening to let the emotions out, but also the beast. Perhaps Sir John was right in some ways, trying to fold the beast back into his own view of himself and not to think it as something separate and other. His sin was giving it unchecked rein. Enough time has passed for us to forgive the Wolfman its perceived cinematic crimes. The intention to honour the original with an intelligent period character piece for adults and not the tweeting teenage crowds is something that should have been applauded. The halfway house attempt to appease both camps still has much in it to be enjoyed. Flawed? Certainly. A disaster? Absolutely not. Imagine, just imagine how hailed this movie would have been if it had been released a couple of years ago as the opening salvo in Universal's Dark Universe, instead of The Mummy, a movie that again is trying to hit those 4-quadrant big blockbuster family entertainment tick boxes. If The Wolfman, as it was released then, had been released last year exactly as we saw it, we'd be singing its praises and salivating at the prospect of the next movie in the Dark Universe. Please join me next time when we're at X, a letter which affords slim pickings for titles to choose from, but I've got a cracker that's recently had a delicious Blu-ray release. Look to the skies when we reveal that X is for